Today I'm going to be benchmarking the 5070 versus the 9070. The 5070 is from MSI and is the Vanguard edition, and the 9070 is from ASRock and is the Steel Legend edition. The 5070 has 12 gigs of DDR7, while the 9070 has 16 gigs of DDR6. Both the MSRP prices of these cards are $550, but let's be honest, you can't find them for that price, but the aftermarket prices are still very similar. I'm going to be placing these cards in the same build we used for our last benchmarking video when we did it on the 5060 Ti. In that build, you have an Intel Core Ultra 5 245K, 32 gigs of RAM at 6000 speed, a Gigabyte B860 Aurora's Elite motherboard, and all testing is going to be done in 1080p and 1440p. A few details before we get started. I am using a 1PC setup for this benchmarking, so I am recording with the same computer I'm doing the benchmarkings on. Also, I'm only going to be showing one set of settings before every benchmark. Just so you guys know, the only thing that I'll be changing is the resolution going from 1080p to 1440p. And if I'm using an NVIDIA card, I have DLSS set to on and quality. And if I have an AMD card, that's set to FSR on and also set to quality. I'm not going to take too much more of your time. We're going to jump right into the benchmarks. The first game on our list is Assassin's Creed Shadows at 1080p on ultra high settings and ray tracing also on ultra high. The 5070 averaged 61 FPS with a minimum of 38 and the maximum of 75, the max wattage also being at 191. On the other hand, the 9070 averaged FPS was 72, a minimum of 24, a maximum of 158, and max wattage at 248, giving an 11 average FPS increase. At 1440p, same settings, the 5070 averaged 57 FPS with a minimum of 24, the maximum of 71, and the max wattage at 200. The 9070 averaged 69 FPS with a minimum of 20, the maximum of 169, and the max wattage at 269, giving it a 12 average FPS increase. This game was beautiful. The next game on our list is Call of Duty at 1080p at max settings. The 5070 averaged 137 FPS with the 1% lows at 89 and the max wattage at 168. The 9070 on the other hand averaged FPS as 133, the 1% lows at 86, and the max wattage at 218, giving the 5070 a 4 average FPS increase. At 1440p, it was a different story. The 5070 averaged 107, the 1% lows at 66, and the max wattage at 175. The 9070 averaged FPS at 126, the 1% lows at 84, and the max wattage at 250, giving it a 19 average FPS increase. But don't worry, we also tested Call of Duty on min settings for all of you competitive gamers. The 5070 averaged 190 FPS with the 1% lows at 129 and the max wattage at 158. The 9070 on the other hand averaged 188 FPS with the 1% lows at 120 and the max wattage at 152, giving the 5070 a 2 average FPS increase. At 1440p, you see a lot of what you saw in the previous test. The 5070 averaged 165 FPS with 1% lows of 109 and the max wattage at 167. The 9070 on the other hand averaged 185 FPS with 1% lows at 118 and the max wattage at 313, giving it a 20 average FPS increase. Let's hop into our next game, Forza 5 at max settings. The 5070 averaged 173 FPS with the 1% lows at 126 and the max wattage at 175. The 9070 averaged 199 FPS with the 1% lows at 143, the max wattage at 244, giving it a 26 average FPS increase. At 1440p on extreme settings, the 5070 averaged 157 FPS with the 1% lows of 118 and the max wattage at 186. The 9070 averaged 181 with the 1% lows of 130, the max wattage at 245, giving it a 24 average FPS increase. This game looked beautiful, performed well. Again, I just don't like driving the Corvette. The next game on our list is Monster Hunter Wilds at 1080p on max settings. The 5070 averaged 94 FPS, the 1% lows at 41, and the max wattage at 164, giving it a score of 32,002. The 9070 on the other hand averaged 103 FPS with the 1% lows at 49, the max wattage at 238, and the score being 35,134, giving it a 9 average FPS increase. This game was beautiful, and I watch all my friends play this game. It's just not a game that I would get into. At 1440p ultra settings, the 5070 averaged 85 FPS with the 1% lows at 32, the max wattage of 180, and the score of 28,783. The 9070, on the other hand, averaged 98 FPS with the 1% lows at 47 and the max wattage at 258. The score is 33,367, giving it a 13 average FPS increase. The next game on our list is Black Myth Wukong at 1080p on cinematic settings. The 5070 averaged 78 FPS with a 1% low of 62, the max wattage at 206. On the other hand, the 9070 averaged 72 FPS with the 1% lows at 27 and the max wattage at 250, giving the 5070 a 6 average FPS increase. I was really hoping to see more of Wukong himself, but we saw a lot of water and a lot of trees, but it's great for benchmarking, but I just wanted something a little nicer to see while doing this. At 1440p, the 5070 averaged 68 FPS with the 1% lows at 55 and the max wattage at 215. The 9070, on the other hand, averaged an FPS of 64 with the 1% lows at 24 and the max wattage at 251, giving the 5070 a 4 average FPS increase, which is practically unnoticeable. Lastly, we tossed both these cards into 3D Mark at 1440p. The 5070 on one hand averaged 52 FPS, while the 9070 averaged 58 FPS, giving it a 4 average FPS increase. I really hope this data helped you guys. This is my third ever benchmarking video, and I'm trying to get better every single time I make one of these. So if you have any constructive comments, please leave them in the comment section below, and be kind, because I'm, again, new at this and I'm just using what I have. We can all agree that there's so many different ways of benchmarking. I went with the realistic route of what I think someone would put in their computer build if they bought a 5070 or a 9070. Obviously, if I use the top of the line CPU, there wouldn't be any bottlenecking and we can, get those kind of results. But I want to be realistic to see what someone would get if they built a computer very similar to mine. But with all of that being said, out of all the results and all the data we got today, which card would you put in your next build if you had to just pick one? Please leave it in the comments below. And again, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day. And I'll hope to see you in the next one.